out on the far edge of the American frontier, where the land stretched wide and empty and the wind never stopped whispering, there lived a lone rancher cursed by fate and loneliness. He was a quiet man, hardened by years of loss, living on a broken ranch that seemed to bleed dust instead of life. His wife had died long ago, taken by sickness, and his child had been buried under a crooked wooden cross near the creek. Since then, the rancher spoke little, trusting only his horse, his rifle, and the long days of work that kept his mind from breaking. Every morning he rose before the sun, patched fences, checked cattle, and stared across the endless plains with eyes full of regret. The land was harsh, and so was life, but something darker seemed to cling to his soul, as if the land itself had marked him as cursed. Neighbors avoided his ranch, calling it bad ground, whispering that death followed the man like a shadow. Apache territory lay not far beyond his fence line, and most settlers feared crossing that invisible border, but the rancher had stopped caring about fear long ago. Fear had nothing left to take from him. At night, when the coyotes cried and the moon hung low and red, memories returned like ghosts, filling his small cabin with pain. He would sit alone by the fire, holding a tin cup, wondering why he still lived when everyone he loved was gone. The silence around him was heavy, broken, only by the crackle of flames and the distant howl of the wild. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon and painted the sky with fire and dust, the rancher felt something different in the air. The horses grew restless, the wind shifted, and a deep unease settled into his chest. He stepped outside with his rifle, scanning the darkening land, his instincts sharp despite his tired body. That was when he saw her. She stood tall near the edge of his land, larger than any woman he had ever seen, her figure strong and unmoving like a statue carved from stone. She wore Apache clothing, her long dark hair falling freely over her shoulders, her eyes fixed on him with a calm that felt dangerous. The rancher froze, unsure if she was real or just another trick of his lonely mind. Apache warriors were feared, but this was no ordinary sight. She did not hide. She did not run. She stepped forward slowly, confidently, as if the land belonged to her. The rancher felt his heart pound, fear mixing with curiosity. He had faced outlaws, hunger, and death, but something about her presence shook him deeper than any threat. She spoke his language, her voice strong and clear, cutting through the evening air like a blade. Her words shocked him, not just because of what she said, but because of how boldly she said them, without shame, without fear. In that moment, the rancher realized his curse had taken a new shape. This was not just danger standing before him, it was destiny knocking at his door. He did not yet understand who she was or why she had come, but he felt it in his bones that her arrival would change everything. The loneliness he had carried for years cracked open, letting in confusion, fear, and something he had not felt in a long time, hope mixed with dread. As the sun disappeared and darkness claimed the land, the rancher stood frozen between his past and an unknown future, knowing deep down that this night marked the beginning of a story the frontier would never forget. The rancher did not sleep that night. Long after the fire burned low and the wind slipped through the cracks of the cabin, her presence stayed with him like a mark on his soul. At dawn, he stepped outside, half believing she had been a dream born from loneliness, but the ground near the fence told another story. Deep footprints pressed into the dirt, firm and real, leading toward the hills. His chest tightened. Whatever had come to his land was no ghost. It was flesh, blood, and purpose. As the morning passed, he tried to return to his work, but his hands shook and his thoughts drifted back to her steady eyes and fearless voice. The land felt smaller now, as if watched. By afternoon, the heat grew heavy, and the sky hung low with dust. That was when she returned, walking openly across the plain as if the world belonged to her. She stopped a few steps away, tall and unafraid, her shadow stretching long across the dirt. The rancher stood still, rifle in hand but lowered, knowing deep inside that pointing it at her would change nothing. She spoke again, calm and direct, explaining that she was not there by accident. She told him her tribe watched the land, that old borders were shifting, and that his ranch sat on ground claimed by blood and memory. Her words were not angry, but they carried weight, like stones dropped into deep water. Then came her demand. She spoke of balance, of debt, of a bond that must be formed to stop violence and bloodshed. The rancher struggled to understand, his mind caught between fear and disbelief. To him, her demand sounded impossible, dangerous, and wrong by every rule he had ever known. He tried to refuse, his voice rough, his pride rising like a shield. But she did not argue. She simply stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his, and told him that refusal would bring death, not only to him, but to others who had nothing to do with their meeting. The wind rose around them, lifting dust and dry grass, as if the land itself listened. The rancher felt trapped, not by force, but by the truth in her words. He saw no lie in her face, no hunger for cruelty, only certainty. She spoke of how she had been chosen, burdened with responsibility since childhood, shaped by strength and loss just like him. For a moment, the frontier fell silent, and two broken lives stood facing each other across a line neither had asked to draw. The rancher's thoughts raced. He had lived alone for so long that choice itself felt unfamiliar. Every road before him looked dark. Yet something inside him stirred, a deep sense that fate had already moved beyond his control. He asked her why him, why his cursed land, why now? Her answer was simple and cruel in its honesty. Because he had nothing left to lose, and because the land had already taken everything from him. The words cut deep. She turned away after speaking, telling him he had until the next full moon to decide. No threats followed, no guards appeared. She walked back toward the hills, leaving him standing alone with the weight of her demand crushing his chest. The sun dipped low as he returned to his cabin, every step heavy, every breath tight. Inside, the walls felt closer than ever before. He sat at the table, staring at the worn wood, replaying every word, every look. Anger rose, then fear, then a quiet sadness that felt worse than both. He realized that the curse he believed had shaped his life had only been preparing him for this moment. Outside, the land stretched wide and unforgiving, but inside him, a storm had begun. The frontier had given him a choice wrapped in destiny, and no matter what he decided, blood, loss, or change would follow. As night fell and the moon climbed slowly into the sky, the rancher understood one truth clearly: his quiet life was over, and the demand made that day would shape not only his future, but the fate of the land itself. After the Apache girl vanished into the hills, the rancher's days lost their shape. Time still moved, but it no longer felt steady. Morning came, evening followed, yet his thoughts stayed trapped in the space between fear and longing. He worked the land like before, mending fences, feeding cattle, drawing water, but every task felt heavier, as if the earth itself pressed against his chest. He watched the horizon more than he watched his hands, expecting her tall figure to rise again from the dust. Fear told him she was danger, a storm waiting to break. But another feeling, one he had buried years ago, whispered her name in his mind even though he did not know it. Loneliness had ruled his life for so long that temptation now felt like a kind of pain. At night, he lay awake on his narrow bed, listening to the wind and remembering her voice, calm and certain. Nothing like the frightened voices of settlers he had known. She did not beg or threaten. She spoke as if fate itself stood behind her words. That scared him more than guns or knives ever had. Days later, she returned again, this time closer to the house, standing near the old corral where broken wood leaned like tired bones. The rancher stepped out slowly, his heart racing, unsure whether to greet her or demand she leave. She studied him in silence, as if measuring the weight of his soul. Her presence stirred something deep inside him, something dangerous and alive. He felt small beside her strength, yet drawn to it, like a moth to flame. They spoke little at first. Silence filled the space between them, thick with unspoken thoughts. She told him she had been watching him for years, long before they ever spoke. She knew his losses, his quiet grief, his habit of talking to the land when he thought. No one listened. The rancher felt exposed, as if his wounds were laid bare beneath the sun. Anger flared in him, sharp and sudden. He accused her of using his pain, of seeing him as weak. She did not deny it. Instead, she said weakness and strength often lived in the same heart. Her words confused him, broke down the walls he had built so carefully. He wanted to push her away, yet he found himself stepping closer, drawn by a feeling he could not name. Temptation grew slowly, not of the body, but of the soul. The temptation to be seen, to be understood, to matter again. He realized then that his fear was no longer just of her people or her demand, but of what he felt when she stood near him. She challenged him, questioned his silence, his decision to hide from life after loss. She said the land did not curse him. It was waiting for him to choose whether to live or fade away. Her words stirred anger, shame, and hope all at once. The rancher had buried hope so deep he thought it was dead. Now it stirred, painful and bright. As days passed, their meetings continued, always tense, always charged. Sometimes they argued, voices rising like clashing thunder. Other times they stood quietly, watching the sun fall behind the hills. In those moments, the rancher felt something close to peace, and that frightened him most of all. Peace meant risk. Peace meant caring again. He saw flashes of sadness in her eyes too, moments when her strong posture softened, revealing the burden she carried for her people. She was not free, just as he was not. They were both trapped by duty, loss, and history. The frontier around them seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting to see which force would win fear or desire. One evening, as the sky burned red and gold, the rancher realized the truth he had been avoiding. He was no longer choosing whether to listen to her demand. He was choosing whether to keep living as a ghost or step into a future that terrified him. The temptation was not just her presence. It was the chance to feel alive again, even if it meant pain. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, the rancher stood beside her, knowing that fear still ruled his heart, but temptation had begun to challenge it, and the battle inside him had only just begun. The land did not stay quiet for long. After the days of tense meetings and unspoken feelings, the frontier began to show its true face. Trouble always came slowly at first, like a dark line forming far away where the earth met the sky. The rancher noticed the signs before anyone else would have. His cattle grew nervous, bunching together as if sensing danger. The birds that once rested near the creek disappeared. Even the wind felt sharper, carrying warnings instead of comfort. He had lived on the edge of danger long enough to know that peace in the west never lasted. Somewhere beyond his land, enemies were moving. Some were men with guns and greed in their hearts. Others were warriors bound by honor, suspicion, and old wounds that had never healed. Word began to travel through. Whispers. Traders passing through spoke of angry Apache warriors questioning strangers, asking about a lone rancher who lived too close to sacred ground. At the same time, rough men from nearby towns started circling the area. Outlaws and land thieves smelled opportunity, believing the rancher was weak and alone. They talked openly in saloons, laughing about taking his land once fear drove him away or death claimed him. The rancher heard these stories and felt the weight of them press against his chest. For years he had survived by keeping his head down, but now his name carried meaning again, and meaning brought danger. The Apache girl warned him that eyes were watching from both sides, that neither the tribe nor the settlers trusted silence. In the West, silence often meant secrets, and secrets led to blood. Their meetings grew shorter and more urgent. When she came to him now, her calm was edged with worry. She told him some of her people believed she had grown too close to him, that her strength and loyalty were being questioned. Among the Apache, doubt was as dangerous as betrayal. The rancher listened, knowing that his presence in her life was pulling her toward trouble she did not deserve. At the same time, armed men rode near his land at night, their campfires glowing like red eyes in the darkness. He heard gunshots far away, not aimed at anything, just reminders that violence waited close by. The frontier felt smaller each day, closing in around them. Fear returned to the rancher, heavier than before. This fear was not sharp and sudden but slow and crushing. He worried that any choice he made would cost lives. If he pushed the Apache girl away, her people might still attack, believing damage was already done. If he stood beside her, settlers would see him as a traitor and a threat. He began to understand that the demand she had spoken of was not only about balance, but survival. The land itself seemed divided, pulled between old laws and new greed. Every sunset felt like a countdown, every sunrise a warning that time was running out. One evening, as dust rose along the horizon, the rancher saw riders moving fast toward his property. They did not cross onto his land, but their message was clear. They wanted him afraid. He tightened his grip on his rifle, knowing he could not fight a war alone. Later that night, the Apache girl came quietly, her expression hard. She told him that warriors were gathering too, that some believed blood must be spilled to restore honor. Her voice did not shake, but her eyes carried a sadness deeper than words. She did not want war, but she could not stop it alone. Standing there under the cold stars, the rancher realized that enemies were no longer just rumors or shadows. They were real, armed, and close. The frontier had drawn its lines, and both sides were preparing to cross them. The rancher felt the old curse tighten its grip, but he also felt something new rising inside him resolve. He did not know how the storm would break, only that it was coming fast. As the wind howled across the plains and the horizon darkened with approaching danger, one truth became clear. The West was about to test him, and the enemies gathering at the edge of his world would force him to choose who he truly was. As danger closed in from every direction, something unexpected grew between the rancher and the Apache girl. It did not begin with touch or promises. It began with shared silence. In the quiet moments before dawn or in the soft glow of dying firelight, they found themselves standing side by side, not speaking, yet understanding each other in ways words never could. The frontier was loud with threats, but between them, there was a fragile calm, as if two wounded souls had found shelter in the same storm. The rancher had spent years believing his heart was empty, dried out like the cracked earth around his ranch. Yet with her presence, something began to move inside him again, slow and painful, like life returning to frozen ground. They talked more now, not about demands or danger, but about the past. The rancher spoke of his wife's laughter, of a child's small hands gripping his finger, of graves marked by stones he had placed himself. His voice often broke, but she listened without turning away. She told him of her childhood, trained to be strong from an early age, praised for her size and power, but rarely asked what she wanted. She carried the weight of her people's expectations, like armor that never came off. Though their worlds were different, their pain felt the same. Loss had shaped them both, carving deep lines into their hearts. In those moments, the frontier faded, and only two human beings remained, bound by sorrow and understanding. The bond forming between them was forbidden by every rule of the land. Settlers would call it shameful. The Apache would call it betrayal. Yet neither could deny what was growing. The rancher felt it in the way his chest tightened when she was near, in the fear that rose when she did not appear for days. He had lived without hope for so long that feeling it again scared him more than any enemy. The Apache girl felt it too, though she tried to hide it behind duty and strength. She told herself she was protecting her people, that her closeness to him was necessary. But late at night, alone beneath the stars, she admitted the truth to herself. He mattered to her, and that truth was dangerous. Their closeness deepened as the threat around them grew. They planned quietly, sharing warnings and information, watching the land together. Trust, once broken in both their lives, slowly rebuilt itself. The rancher began to see her not as a symbol of danger, but as a woman carrying impossible responsibility. She began to see him not as a weak settler, but as a man shaped by love and loss, still standing when many would have fallen. Each shared look felt like crossing a line, and yet neither stepped back. The frontier had taken so much from them already. This bond felt like something the land owed them in return. Still, fear lingered. The rancher knew that love in the West often ended in blood. He tried to keep distance, warning himself that caring would only bring pain. But every time he pulled away, the emptiness returned, sharper than before. The Apache girl felt torn as, well, her people needed her strength, her loyalty, her obedience. Loving him could cost her everything, her place, her honor, even her life. Yet the idea of walking away from him felt like another kind of death. The bond between them was no longer a choice. It had become a truth neither could escape. One evening, as the sky darkened and danger felt close enough to touch, they stood together near the old corral. The wind moved through the broken boards, carrying dust and whispers of what was coming. They did not speak of love or the future. They did not make promises they could not keep. Instead, they stood close, sharing warmth in the cold night, both knowing that the world would never allow this bond to exist peacefully. The rancher understood then that forbiddance did not mean wrong. Sometimes it simply meant costly. As the stars burned bright above them, the bond between the lone rancher and the giant Apache girl became something unbreakable, forged not by desire, alone, but by shared pain, trust, and the quiet courage to care in a land that punished the weak. Whatever came next, violence, sacrifice, or loss, this bond would shape every choice they made. In the unforgiving heart of the Wild West, they had found something rare and dangerous, and neither could turn away anymore. The storm they had feared did not arrive quietly. It came with dust, thunder, and the sound of hooves cutting across the dry earth. The rancher felt it before he saw it, a deep sense of wrong that settled into his bones as the sun dipped low. The air grew thick, heavy with danger, as if the land itself was holding its breath. He stepped out of his cabin and scanned the horizon, his eyes narrowing. In the distance, dark shapes moved, fast riders, more than a few, spreading out like wolves preparing to strike. At the same time, from the opposite hills, shadows appeared where Apache warriors watched in silence, their presence sharp and tense. The rancher understood then that the moment of choice had arrived. The West was done waiting. The Apache girl appeared beside him without a sound. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned with urgency. She told him there was no more time. Words had failed. Warnings had been ignored. Both sides believed blood would settle what talk could not. She carried this truth like a wound she had always known would open. For years she had been trained for moments like this, taught that leadership meant sacrifice. But standing there, close to the man she had grown to care for, the weight of that lesson felt heavier than ever before. She knew that whatever happened next would change her life forever. The first gunshot cracked through the air, sharp and sudden. It was not aimed at anyone, just a signal. Chaos followed quickly. Outlaws charged toward the ranch, shouting, firing wildly, driven by greed and fear. The rancher moved on instinct, grabbing his rifle and taking cover, his heart pounding. He had fought before, but never like this, never with so much at stake. Bullets tore through wood, splintering the corral, sending animals screaming into the night. Fire broke out near the barn, flames licking the dry boards, spreading fast in the wind. Smoke filled the air, burning the rancher's lungs and eyes. The land he had bled for was being torn apart in moments. From the hills came movement as Apache warriors advanced, not reckless, but controlled, their faces hard with resolve. The Apache girl stood between two worlds, her body tense, her mind racing. If she fought beside her people, the rancher would likely die. If she defended him openly, she would be marked as a traitor. She had known this choice would come, but knowing did not make it easier. The screams of men, the roar of fire, and the thunder of hooves blurred together into a single terrible sound. This was the true face of the frontier. No heroes, no mercy, only survival. The rancher saw her standing there, frozen, and for a moment, their eyes met through smoke and flame. In that look, everything passed between them, fear, trust, regret, and a bond deeper than words. He shouted for her to run, to save herself, but she did not move. Instead, she stepped forward, placing herself in the open, raising her voice above the chaos. She called out to her people, commanding them to stop. Her strength filled the air, powerful and unyielding. For a brief moment, the fighting slowed. Some warriors hesitated. Some outlaws faltered. The land itself seemed to pause. Then another shout rang out, closer this time, and the fragile balance shattered. The Apache girl made her choice. She moved to the rancher's side, standing with him, not behind him. Together, they fought to protect life, not land, pushing back against those who cared only for destruction. The rancher felt fear like never before, but also clarity. He was no longer running from his curse. He was facing it head-on. Flames rose higher, the night glowing red, and the cost of every decision became painfully clear. When the fighting finally slowed and the dust began to settle, the ranch lay scarred and broken. Bodies lay still, fire smoldered in the ruins, and silence crept back in, heavy and cruel. The Apache girl stood breathing hard, her face marked with ash and sorrow. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The rancher looked at what remained of his home and understood that survival did not mean victory. It meant loss, sacrifice, and living with the weight of choices made in fire and blood. The frontier had demanded everything, and neither of them would ever be the same again. When the smoke finally thinned and the wind carried away the last smell of fire, the land looked older, as if it had aged many years in a single night. The rancher stood among the ruins of what had once been his life. The corral was broken, the barn half burned, and the ground was marked with blood and deep tracks that told the story better than words ever could. Survival had come, but it did not come clean. It came scarred and heavy, leaving behind silence that felt louder than the battle itself. The rancher's body ached, but the pain inside him was worse. He had fought to live, yet everything he had lived for now lay in pieces around him. The Apache girl stood a short distance away, her strong shoulders lowered for the first time since he had known her. Ash darkened her skin, and her eyes carried a sorrow that could not be hidden. She looked at the land, then at the rancher, knowing the truth they both feared. What she had done could never be undone. By standing beside him, she had turned away from the path her people had set for her. Some warriors had withdrawn in confusion, others in anger. Word would spread quickly. Among her people, loyalty was everything, and she had chosen a different kind of loyalty, one that would cost her dearly. They did not speak at first. Words felt small compared to what had been lost. The rancher walked slowly, picking up a broken tool, then setting it down again. He realized then that even if the ranch could be rebuilt, the life he once knew was gone forever. The quiet days of hiding from the world were over. He had stepped into history, into conflict, and there was no return to peace without consequence. Survival had demanded courage, but it now demanded acceptance. He had to face what living truly meant. The Apache girl finally spoke, her voice calm but tired. She told him her people would come looking for her. Some would want answers. Others would want punishment. She could not stay long without bringing more danger to his land. Hearing this, the rancher felt a tight pain in his chest. He had lost so much already, and now the thought of losing her too felt unbearable. Yet he understood. Love in the West was often shaped by distance and loss. Holding on too tightly only made the fall harder. He told her she should go while she still could, before more blood was spilled. Saying the words felt like tearing something out of himself. She listened, her jaw tight, her eyes searching his face. She had been taught to be strong, but strength did not make this choice easier. Leaving meant safety for him, but loneliness for her. Staying meant danger for both. The price of survival was not paid in one moment. It followed you, step by step. Long after the fighting ended. As the sun climbed higher, they stood together one last time near the edge of the land. No promises were made, no future was spoken of. The rancher knew better than to offer hope where none was certain. The Apache girl placed her hand briefly on his arm, a simple touch filled with everything they could not say. In that moment, he understood that survival was not about winning or losing. It was about carrying memory forward, even when it hurt. She turned and began to walk toward the hills, her tall figure strong against the open sky. The rancher watched, until she became a dark shape in the distance, then nothing at all. The land felt empty again, but different this time. The emptiness was not just loss, it was meaning. He had loved, he had chosen, and he had survived. The cost had been high, but the choice had been real. Left alone, the rancher began to clean what remained, not because he believed everything could be fixed, but because life demanded movement. With every step, every breath, he carried the weight of what had happened. The frontier had taken its payment in fire, blood, and separation. And as the wind moved across the broken land, one truth remained clear to him now. Survival was never free. It always asked for something precious in return.